Hello, and a very warm welcome to Feminism from an Unwoke World, an unwieldy name for a podcast trying to make sense of an unwieldy world. My name is Shruti Advani, and this week I speak with Emily Skala, who is the principal flute for the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra for over 3 decades until she got fired for sharing anti vax posts on her personal social media accounts. Scala 59 had previously been criticized for posts questioning the validity of Joe Biden's presidency and for saying that black families needed to do more to support their children's classical music studies. On the pandemic, Scala has said, and I quote, "There is no pandemic. The causes of death have been due to the very same diseases people always die of year after year, and people are dying at the very same rate at which they normally die." Now, I don't share Scala's beliefs, most notably her suspicions regarding the pandemic and the vaccine. I'm double jabbed and grateful for it every day. So I was looking forward to discrediting Scala during what I hoped would be a robust debate. But when I spoke with her, I realized that there was much more to Emily Skala's story than the sensational firing that had grabbed media headlines. However, Emily's story forms only a part of this podcast. Hot on the heels of my exclusive interview with Emily Skala, I speak with criminal law expert Michael Turner, QC. He's the former chairman of the Criminal Bar Association. For those who know him or know of him, Michael is a formidable opponent. And so, in my positioning of Emily's arguments, I call in reinforcements in the form of Voltaire. Listen on to see how and why Michael boldly claims that the French philosopher got it wrong when it comes to free speech. The Advani in conversation today with Emily Skala. Emily, thank you so much for joining me today. You are and have been the principal flautist, as we would say here in the UK, flutist, I believe you say in the US, um, for the Baltimore Symphony Opera for 3 decades.
Orchestra, the principal, yes, Baltimore Symphony Orchestra.
And yet, when I spoke with you a few days ago, you said you had just received your last paycheck.
Yes, that's true, Shruti.
What's
Well,
happened?
it's possibly true. I have filed my appeal of their decision to dismiss me. So as long as the situation is being considered for appeal, then I remain an employee of the institution.
But what happened, Emily? I mean, you have a stellar reputation as a musician. You've devoted your professional career, your life, to the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. So what went wrong? Why
Yes.
the dismissal?
Yes. First of all, Shruti, let me just thank you for inviting me to have this opportunity to speak about the situation. I'm honored to be given a voice here today with you. It's very important to, I think, be able to talk about how this all came about. Yes, during all of last year, I was sharing information as I was studying and learning about what was going on in the world. And in particular, I shared some information on the vaccine and the PCR technique and the election, the US elections from last November, as a private citizen on my Facebook page. And I was informed from the CFO and HR VP at the BSO that there had been complaints they were receiving from the Baltimore audience and from colleagues about these posts.
So not about your work as a flutist, as what you had posted on Facebook.
Yes.
You were receiving complaints and you were dismissed for these posts concerning the vaccine as well as the elections in the US that you made on your Facebook page, as you say, as a private citizen. How did
Uh,
that play out? Did they how did you find out? Was it an email? Was it a phone call? Were you called in for your version of events? How did you find out that you're losing your job of 30 years?
well, I wasn't dismissed as a direct result of these posts. I had been asked at the end of January to publish my posts privately rather than publicly. And I gave some consideration over a couple of weeks to their request before I made any changes. And the reason I took some time, Shruti, is that I had been working on a serious situation with management with a few different managements for a period of 12 years of insubordination and harassment and various kinds of abuse from my colleagues, which had gone virtually unaddressed. And I um, I took a little bit of time, to consider their request in light of how much time it had taken them to consider and act upon my previous requests for help. I thought that was reasonable, but before I could make any adjustment, they posted an announcement on their professional Facebook page on February 13th, Valentine's weekend. And coincidentally, on the same day, some leaked emails of mine went public all over Facebook and also on the BSO professional Facebook page. These leaked emails that I had written after a diversity, equity, and inclusion meeting. It wasn't supposed to have been a diversity, equity, inclusion meeting. It was intended to be a meeting where we discussed putting out a statement of support for Black musicians in the community after the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. But somehow it turned into a DEI meeting. Anyway, my work emails subsequent to this meeting had been exposed. So there were cries of racism and anti-Semitism, in addition to the BSO distancing themselves from me because of the public outcry for this
I haven't seen these emails, Emily, so I'm going to take your word for what you say to me today. Do you consider yourself someone who holds either racist or anti-Semite views?
Oh, no, absolutely not, Shruti. Of course not. If I had acted in such a way, because it's the behavior and not the beliefs that are illegal, right? Discrimination is illegal, and it's written in our policy, of course. So if I had behaved in any discriminatory kind of way and it was provable, I would have been released, of course, a very, very long time ago by any number of my employers since I was first employed in 1983. So no, I'm not a racist or an anti-Semite. And in fact, my emails, having been reviewed by BSO counsel, also cleared that bar last summer. So there's no issue there.
Anyway, so it seems like BSO had their
So
own view on the whole.
well, it wasn't the BSO view. It was in response to public outcry.
Right,
These so-called complaints, which remained unsubstantiated, no evidence was given of it. It's just hearsay. And
did you have a chance to defend yourself? Would you say
no,
it was a fair
no,
trial? Given an opportunity to defend yourself?
no, that's a very interesting question. I was never given this opportunity to defend myself or face my accusers, and this is very much the way traitors are treated. This only happens when you're issued a FISA warrant. This is the only condition in which you are given no opportunity to face your accusers. But at the Baltimore Symphony, when someone complains about you, you are not allowed to know who. You're not allowed to speak to them, adult to adult. And there's just simply no proof of the action of which you are accused of.
All it requires, it sounds like to me, all it requires is for someone to make the accusation.
Yes.
Once the accusation is made, your
Yes.
fate seems to be preordained.
Yes, exactly.
So how was this fate delivered to you? What happened? You've spent 30 years with this institution. You're their principal flautist. How do they communicate to you that they're letting you go?
Well, okay. So Shruti, it wasn't a direct line between my Facebook posts and the dismissal. The first thing is they asked me to post privately. Okay, so a week or so later, after they made this public distancing from me and claimed that I wasn't comporting with their code of conduct, which it's interesting to note did not exist until they made this post. So I didn't comport with this code of conduct, which requires respect and humanity from all of their members. Okay, now this post that they made on Facebook, it solicited 674 responses, most of which said that I didn't deserve my job and I should be fired from the orchestra. But what they did first is they took away all of my assignments. They took me out of the public eye, and they put me on indefinite, indefinite suspension without assignment, basically, until further notice.
What does that feel like for an artist, a performer?
Well,
what does it feel like to have that platform taken away, to have your music, in a way, taken away from you?
It felt very insulting at first, because all I had been asking for the previous 12 years was to be respected as a principal player, to be allowed to perform my job without interference, to not be questioned for my expertise, to be allowed to do my job and not be doubted for what I was hired to do, to be supported for what I was hired to do. So to take away all my assignments, in the first place, it was a violation of their own harassment policy of 2018, which had just been put in place. But it didn't matter that I was pointing that out for them. So they continued to do that. And next, and I asked them if they would remove the post, because I felt that it was harming not only me, but the organization. Because they were just saying all kinds of negative things that weren't true. So I asked them in many ways and from many different sources to remove the post, and they declined at all times. I believe it's probably still up, although they might have taken it down since dismissing me. And then of course they created a social media policy right away, which they'd never had before. And they had much cause to have one before.
Is not in place when you actually posted on your social media?
That's correct.
Okay. And so you find yourself dismissed?
No, not yet. This was all happening in February. I'm not dismissed until August. Yeah. So anyway, the short story is they ended up suspending me for a total of 5 weeks without pay. But for such infractions as calling various members of the upper management for work-related things in general, or as it turns out, calling friends of the orchestra for social purposes.
And so that's 5 weeks that you're sitting at home, your performances have been canceled, and you're not being paid for your time.
Actually, it was a total of 6 months.
At the end,
only 5 weeks unpaid.
Right.
But it's 5 weeks unpaid on top of my salary having been reduced, Shruti, by like $75,000 this year.
And so at the end of this suspension, at the end of a 6-month period, you're then told this is going to be a permanent situation. You no longer have your job.
That's right.
How did that
And I no longer have my job because I went to the building. Now, one of my suspensions was an indefinite suspension from the building itself, because they assumed, since I had posted a video by a trained medical doctor out of New Zealand. Her name is Sam Bailey, and she puts regular videos on YouTube. I posted her video on the PCR test, and I thought it was informative, very, very well done. And I posted it so that we all could understand the PCR test better. And the audiences apparently didn't appreciate it. And I don't think I said anything about it particular. I don't think I offered an opinion, but there it was for everybody to enjoy and learn from. So because I posted that, HR made an assumption that I would no longer be following the safety protocols of the BSO, and therefore I should be banned from the building. And I said, well, it's simply not true that I won't follow the safety protocols, because performing is important to me. And I had been following the safety protocols in October and November when I had assignments to perform, before wind and brass players were taken off of assignments per the Baltimore mayor's mandates. But did the new HR VP check with operations manager or personnel manager or assistant personnel manager to see that I had a history of following safety protocols? No, he didn't do any investigation or research at all to see that I had a history of following safety protocols. He made an assumption, and he suspended me from the building indefinitely. So
did you have any inkling that this might be heading your way? Were you interviewing for other positions? Were you actively looking for another job? Did you have any idea this was what was being planned for you?
Well, I did have 2 inquiries out for some auditions, but understand that there were no auditions being held during COVID year, lockdowns and mandates and travel restrictions and things. There are no auditions being held in the US. There are auditions being held in Europe, but I don't have any funds with which to travel.
What are you going to do? What do you think your next steps might be? What are the options open to you?
Well, I do have an invitation to an audition that's not until October. So certainly I will just, my motto is, just one step in front of the other. And, but, I do have some recourse here. And also I received a wonderful letter last night, which I understand has been sent to Marin Alsop and to the BSO in my defense. And it corroborates everything that I've posted on Facebook about the vaccines and the election, not the election but the medical information. And it encourages them to reinstate me right away. So
who's the letter from, if I may ask? Is it a colleague?
No, it's from a fellow I don't know. I don't know where he's from. I'm assuming he's out of New York. It seems to be it's an independent journalist named Walter Gellis or Gels. I don't know if it's a soft G or a hard G, but it's an incredibly comprehensive, well-documented letter. And
well, I think for a lot of people like Walter, and I don't presume to speak for him, I don't know whether music is, and your music in particular, is what drove him to write the letter, but I suspect for a lot of people this is neither about the music, nor about the vaccine, nor about your take on US politics. Frankly speaking, for most people, it's about whether you're allowed to hold certain perspectives and still continue to do your job? Or do we think your political beliefs are hindering your ability as a principal player in the orchestra? And I suspect the discussion around your role has gone wider because for most people, one should not encroach on the other. Surely what you post on your social media should not have a bearing on how you're treated in your workplace or whether or not you continue to be employed.
You know, Shruti, I didn't consider these to be political beliefs. I considered them to be personal mores. For me, what was important was putting human life ahead of my one single job. I was sharing information that I thought would help everyone make decisions that would safeguard their well-being, their health, and their overall safety.
You now, when you're in a position when arguably you are in need of safeguarding and help yourself, do you have a support system? Is anyone helping you through this? Where is your head at? Are you feeling supported? How are you feeling?
You know, there were times when I experienced profound grief and isolation. I realized I was being forced into something that we now call non-personhood these days, forced into a kind of non-existence where my colleagues actually wish me to be non-existent. They don't want me to come back into the hall to be on stage with them. They've tried for a long time to minimize me, to vilify me, to turn me into a contagion, and they're even calling me clinically insane. You know, they've been gaslighting me and trying to defame me, and now they're literally taking my career away from me. Even the respect and love of my former students, you know, to whom I gave everything, all of myself. And one colleague even called my sister at the family home to say she was worried for my mental health and that I need medical intervention.
How
So,
did your sister respond?
I mean, she was out of her mind with me. She was like, "You've done this to yourself. No wonder they don't want you. No wonder they don't." I mean, so needless to say, it hasn't been good for our relationship. And I mean, that was a gross violation of personal and professional boundaries.
Do you
But,
worry
you know,
for your
just,
mental health now that you're going through what you're going through? It's
you know,
a shock. It's a life change. It's an event that's likely to make you feel out of control. Do you believe
well, you know,
suffering?
I did experience, some deep feelings, of course, from times, and I did a confusion. You know, why would anybody want that for me when I haven't harmed anyone? But I just want to interject here, you know, lest your listeners are tempted to agree with my orchestra colleagues. I never hesitated to consult medical professionals along the way during those 12 years, you know, or social workers. I never hesitated to consult them, and they all came to
About
the
your
very,
mental health?
yeah, sure, about what was going on. You
I
know,
know a
so
lot of
because
people who should
I
be
wanted,
doing that, who would be very
yes,
reluctant to do
I
that.
wanted to understand, you know, what really is going on here, and in what way am I contributing, if at all, and what can I do better? It's always the first question I ask myself: what can I be doing better? Because I don't want to contribute to these situations. I was taught to be responsible, and to look ahead and to see the possible outcomes of my actions before I take them. But all the professionals, without exception, all of them, came to the very same conclusion. What was going on was incompetent leadership. They said the result of the behavior of the colleagues was due to incompetent leadership. Without hesitation, every single one, including the head of psychology at Johns Hopkins Hospital.
How
And
likely do
he,
you think you're how likely do you think you are to find a similar role in your industry?
well, Shruti, I've come very close on 3 occasions, very, very close. once for the Boston Symphony, I tied for principal with 2 others. And in Berlin Philharmonic, I was a semifinalist among 6 others. I was the only American flutist to be in the semifinals. I was one of 2 women only. And they have a small percentage of women in that orchestra. And the other time was for San Francisco Symphony. I was one of 5 finalists, but I was taking the red eye 2 weekends in a row, and I was playing the Brandenburg Concerti here in Baltimore while I was taking audition on the West Coast, and my nervous system just couldn't really make it to the finish line. So.
Do you think do you know of other colleagues who've been dismissed for cause? Do you know of colleagues that you worked with that have expressed opinions, that have engaged in social media content, that have posted things that met with disapproval and were dismissed as a result?
It's very difficult to dismiss a professional musician who's meeting artistic standards. Normally you cannot fire somebody who's artistically competent, and I really don't believe they have a leg.
I'm assuming when you say you cannot fire a musician meeting artistic standards, I'm assuming the corollary would be, when you have a tenured academic, you've got to have justifiable cause to fire them because they've been tenured.
Yes, yeah, and I realize the BSO management believes they have cause here, but their trigger was when I swiped my key card and tried to open the door. Now the door remained locked, so in matter of fact, I was not able to violate my suspension from the building because I was not able to enter. And at no point did I enter the building that day in July. And they announced to the public via the international papers that I had continued to violate the policies and the suspensions. I continued my behavior. Now, my Facebook page has been not frozen, but what do you call it? Deactivated since February. Certainly to the public, a few friends I can communicate with, on Messenger. And I've put a few things on there, but not about vaccines and PCRs and elections. So I am not continuing the same behavior for which they chastised me in the first place. That's certainly not true. I am not still calling. At one point I was asked by the CFO if I would use the new HR vice president as my point of contact on the ongoing matter of harassment and insubordination.
Before we move to that, can I take you back to something you said, Emily? Because I think it's important when we're going to discuss next steps for you. Mm-hmm. You said you have opportunities lined up. You just don't have the funds to fly around the country auditioning for these opportunities. What is, and I'm sorry to pry, but so what is the practicality of your financial situation now? I know you've received your last paycheck, but this is after you've already taken a massive pay cut. How long do you expect that to last? How are you going to manage financially?
Well, yes. I don't know if they reinstate me due to this letter. Maybe I don't have to worry about it. Right? I just have to take one day at a time, I think. And but I do have a long lost brother in Utah. And I could drive out there for a reasonable cost, stay with him, and then finish the drive. From Utah to San Francisco, for example. This is my first audition. And
are you in danger of losing your home?
I don't know yet. I could sell it for a nice price and move back home with my mother, I suppose. Um, I suppose I could I could lease it out, uh, live with my brother in Utah for a while. I suppose there are some options. I mean, it's a year when families are moving in together, under the current conditions. Um, Things like this are an option.
Michael, thanks so much for joining me today. We've just heard from Emily Skala, a 59-year-old woman who's been fired after 30 years in the job with the BSO for opinions she held outside her workplace. Opinions that had no bearing on her ability, her proven ability as a musician. And now, this is a woman who, after dedicating her life to her music, is wondering what next? How does she go on from here? She's been deplatformed.
Okay. So I'll start, if I may, from the employment perspective. I'm not, I quickly say, an employment lawyer, but as I understand it, firstly, Emily has a website, or at least expresses views about people not getting vaccinated and about not wearing PPE. Now, from an employment perspective, the kind of things that an employer might wish to consider, because they have a duty of care to other employees. So, is this person putting those other employees potentially at risk?
How is she putting them at risk if the other employees are entirely capable of making up their own mind or not about the vaccine?
Well, presumably because she's playing in an orchestra, and I presume given she holds those views, she's not vaccinated.
Aha, but
So,
she's part of a minority, admittedly, but 10% of that orchestra was exempt from taking the vaccine, either for religious beliefs they held or for pre existing underlying conditions. So she wasn't the
okay,
only one that was endangering the lives of her colleagues. She was, as I said, part of a minority that was, for some reason, made exempt from taking the vaccine. For one reason
okay.
or the other, made exempt from taking the vaccine.
Can I ask, presumably those other people who were exempt by reason of health or by reason of religious belief, uh, were they wearing PPE?
Yes, possibly. Possibly PPE wouldn't interfere with either, wouldn't interfere with their religious beliefs or their pre existing medical conditions.
Right. So but as I understand, Emily objects to wearing PPE. Is that right?
Right. And when we say PPE, we're talking about things like a face mask. Like I'm going to say, like the person at Waterstones ahead of me yesterday
Yeah.
who also objected to wearing a face mask and,
Yeah.
went about
Face
their.
masks and potentially gloves. Okay. So far as an employer is concerned, they've got to take that into consideration. The second thing that an employer, I think, needs to take into consideration is how might an employee expressing these views outside the employment situation affect on their business. Now, that's a perfectly legitimate consideration for them to take into account. So, for instance, I'm in a chambers, I'm in a left wing chambers. If one of our barristers was privately um, expressing on the internet views which suggested of Holocaust denial, for instance, we would not want them in chambers.
That's
Um,
an actual crime, though. Holocaust denial is an actual crime.
no, Holocaust denial, interestingly, is not a specific crime in this country.
Would it not be a hate crime, though? When I'm saying
recently,
something,
recently, it has been considered to be so. And can I come on to that in a moment, if I may? What I'm just pointing out at this stage is whether those views were held by any employee may affect the business of an employer. And if the employer considers that it affects their business, then that's a legitimate consideration. Thirdly,
so if the orchestra was worried that when her views were made public, people would be put off by those views and would not want to come watch her perform.
yes, or criticize the orchestra generally. Thirdly, they would want to take into account, so far as leaving aside health grounds, how their own employees, other employees, reacted to those views and therefore reacted to her. And within any orchestra, or as in any team sport or whatever, it's a community of spirit. And these musicians have to work well with one another, the same way as any football team has to work well with one another. So if those views are affecting that community of spirit, then that's another consideration that the employer might want to take into account.
Is that worrying though, Michael? Because I like to say one of a dying breed of centrists. If I went into a workplace tomorrow and people thought I wasn't left enough for their taste, could they band together and have me fired?
Right. Well, okay. Let's now go into, which this leads me into freedom of speech. Right. Now, freedom of speech can't cloak everything that anyone says. So we've already got laws which say that people can't do that. So we've got the Public Order Act of 1986, which says that incitement to racial hatred is a crime. So we've recognized that that's a limitation on people's freedom of speech.
But the
The
idea
Suicide
that
Act.
freedom of speech has to be weighed against this esoteric concept of the greater good, does that not worry you? Because we've seen throughout history great limitations placed on personal liberty in the name of this greater good.
Yeah,
And
no, well, so let's just look at how we deal with these kind of things in criminal law. So the Suicide Act of 1961, not directly comparable, but it's an example, again, of restricting freedom of speech, makes it a crime to encourage or assist suicide. Okay. Now, to come back to your point about whether Holocaust denial is a specific offense in this country, it's not. It's a specific offense in many European countries, France and Germany. It has been recently recognized as a crime in this country, in fact, and there has been a recent case at Southwark Crown Court, and it involved a woman called Chabloz, who was publishing material which suggests that the Holocaust did not take place. And in his judgment, Judge Hehir said that the court did not have to entertain views of absurdity or fiction. Now, so the question, I'll put the question back to you. Therefore, where does encouraging people not to take the vaccine or not to wear PPE fall within that?
Well, it depends on
because
where in the timeline you're going to stop, because we had our own prime minister at the start of the pandemic telling people not to worry too much about PPE and social distancing and the like, because he had just walked through a hospital and shook hands with everybody. So there isn't a very clear distinction between fact and fiction by virtue of the fact that we've never dealt with this virus before. We don't know. We're hoping, we all have good
well,
faith.
don't get me on to whether this prime minister should be imprisoned, um, because there's a very easy answer to that in my view. But the point is, we're dealing with the biggest pandemic that this world has ever faced. So the question for society is, if someone is publishing views that encourage people on an entirely false basis not to get vaccinated, it is spreading views, for instance, that PPE is full of asbestos and don't wear it. Is that going to create a health danger for the rest of the community, and indeed for us? Now, my own personal view is yes, it does. So is one going to condone Donald Trump for saying a load of nonsense about vaccination, of saying you can drink bleach in order to get rid of it? The answer,
It is
I suppose,
ironic, though, that someone elected to office can express that point of view, or can say, go ahead and shake hands with your colleagues, it's no problem, and continue to hold office. But a 59-year-old who is struggling now to find a second wind for her career will lose her job for saying arguably the same thing. She's making the same assertion about the pandemic, about the vaccination, and
I'm not saying there should be a distinction between the politicians or a 59-year-old player in an orchestra. If they are spreading these views and encouraging people not to take the vaccine and encouraging people not to wear PPE, which is therefore endangering them, they are all, in my book, at very least acting recklessly, potentially should be, although it's not an offence at the moment, acting criminally if that law is passed, which I think it should be. And in terms of the employment scenario, well, as I understand it, Emily was warned about this by her employers before she was dismissed. Now, therefore, she was given a warning not to continue spreading this message, but she continued to do so. So the employers didn't act rashly. They gave her that choice, but she did not back down. Now, so what are you as the employer meant to do? If one of your employers continues to spread untruths about this vaccine or PPE when they've been asked to stop and they don't do it, I think it's a little difficult then to fall back on the basis that you are 59 and you want to carry on playing whatever instrument you play. You've been given that choice and you've said, no, I don't want to take it.
okay, so she's lost her job. She's been deplatformed, and this is going to, we think, silence her. Or is it in fact going to draw more attention to the views that she was expressing before she got fired? Would it be more constructive to to put out information, to allow public access to data, wider public access to data, than to have the free speech debate with people who don't agree with the points of views you and I might hold? And she, clearly we don't. I'm double jabbed and grateful every day to live in a country that gave me the opportunity to take the vaccine. However, we may disagree, but does that give me the right, or the orchestra the right to? You've done more than take her livelihood away. They've taken her livelihood away. They've destroyed her mental health. They've destroyed her professional prospects going forward for views she expressed on social media.
Well, if you hold those views privately, then that's fine. She can think what she likes.
Well, when we
Racist.
have precedent showing us otherwise in this very country. There was the case of the gentleman who had worked with the railways for 17 years, expressed views that were deemed anti-Islamist. He was dismissed. The court upheld that he had been dismissed without due cause. He was reinstated. His pension has been returned to him. If in that instance we were to replace anti-Islamist with anti-vax, would that have been a different outcome? It's more acceptable for people to defend their views on religion, to criticize religion, than it is for them to question a vaccine.
Well, in fact, it's not. It rather depends what the consideration is of whether it's inciting racial hatred. So the answer is, on the example that I've just given, in this country, Holocaust denial now is considered under that legislation to be inciting racial hatred. The views that were expressed in relation to our black footballers who missed penalties in the Euro finals, they got horribly abused on the internet. Now, are we going to stand back and say that's fine under the guise of freedom of speech? Or do we say, as right-thinking members of society, that's completely disgusting? We don't want that people. We don't want those people around. And do we seek to prosecute them? Well,
I do
again,
think it's completely disgusting, and not enough of them were prosecuted
well,
because
that's a
they're
matter of
able.
that's a matter of finding them actually, rather than whether.
Right. So is she not had Emily used a burner Twitter account or anonymized her Facebook account, it would be perfectly acceptable to her employer if she went out there and said whatever she wanted to. But it's because there is this direct line that we're able to trace between her and the views she expressed on social media, which we want to encourage, by the way. We want more people to post as people and not as bots. She's lost her job.
No, but if the employer, if she was anonymous, the employer wouldn't know it was her, so this wouldn't arise. It's
Right.
only
We're encouraging people to go out there, create burner accounts, and put what they want on social media.
no. What you're encouraging people to do, what we as a society should be encouraging people to do, is lock down this. I mean, look at America. I mean, 71 million people in America believe that Trump won the election. And part of the reason that they believe that is because of the nonsense that goes out on social media. Now, you can't engage in a debate with some of these people because they're not going to change their views. You know, you can't engage in a debate with dyed-in-the-wool racists. You can't engage in a debate with some of these anti-vaxxers because their conspiracy theories are completely bonkers. So you're not going to, with any sensible debate, persuade them. You can only stop them voicing their views to a wider portion of society in order so they won't be persuaded either to be not vaccinated or not to wear PPE in appropriate circumstances.
Are we managing to do that though? Are we in effect adding more power to their voice by deplatforming them? I'd never heard of Emily before any of this happened. I'd never heard of her views. I wasn't aware of what she felt about either PPE or the vaccine. I certainly am now. Is this the way
Well,
to go about it?
we've only become aware of her, Emily. It doesn't mean we're not aware of anti-vaxxers' views. We've had plenty of publicity about anti-vaxxer views. This happens to be one example of it. I mean, the press reports in relation to what the anti-vaxxers think is nothing new. We know about it. We know that they think that the government is injecting us with little chips that allow our governments to follow them around. We know that they're saying things like PPE is all made of asbestos. We know that because that's part of the publicity that has already been given to these people. So Emily is not
Well,
the
there were
first
people that
person at
expressed
all.
views on the millions taxpayers would be saving once Brexit was done, or on the sea of immigration that we would be exposing ourselves to if Brexit was not done. And a lot of these people posted these views on social media. They put them on banners and took out and joined crowds that were marching down London. They had these conversations at the dinner table, in the boardroom. They didn't lose their job for expressing that point of view, even though a lot of what they said was absolutely factually incorrect. There was no large immigration that we were saving ourselves from by getting Brexit done. There hasn't been millions of pounds saved on a daily basis now that we're not a part of the EU. It was wrong. It was misinformation of the highest order.
Of course. Well, now you're talking about whether politicians lie. Well, politicians do lie.
As an employee, if I said,
We know
if I
that.
had posted a view on Brexit and I echoed some of what I read in the media, or what my friends believed, and I put out information that was factually incorrect, and you could then accuse me of affecting people's vote using misinformation, I wouldn't lose my job for that.
Yes, but you're not comparing like with respect. But Brexit was a political issue, right? And we know a lot of politicians lied about it. Absolutely no question. And this country is heading into a disastrous situation as a result. Right? But you can't. That's politics, right? There is
Are
a
we saying
difference.
the pandemic is a big enough threat to humanity, not just this country, that we need to curtail our right to free speech? Because ultimately it comes down to that. Are we saying that these are exceptional circumstances? We need to suspend certain liberties in order to meet these circumstances.
Well, that's my view. That these people, they can have their own private views, but we need to take away their platforms that encourage people. They are spreading lies about what these vaccines do, and that encourages people not to take them. Now, while the government is taking no action at the moment, employees, in my view, they can protect their own staff, they can protect their own legislation. And in this particular instance, they gave her a choice. As I understand it, Emily was asked to keep her views private. She refused to do it.
She felt it wasn't much of a choice because she felt she was being asked to put her own personal self interest above what she thought of as the greater good. And I suppose here we'll hit that wall again where we're debating what the greater good is. But moving forward from that, is there not an alternative? We're talking about the fact that we're deplatforming people, and that's taking considerable time and energy to do. And it is with cost. It's causing enough devastation at the personal level as we do that. Is there not a better way to counter this?
Well,
It's
hang
not
on.
the government's
Hang on, Shranti. We're
responsibility.
not spending any money on deplatforming people in relation to
Well,
the
we're going to have
anti-vaxxers.
to. Emily is going to resort to legal action, and I'm assuming she's not alone. I'm assuming that there's a lot of people out there that are going to choke up the legal system because they believe they've been wrongfully dismissed, or because they believe they've been denied something because of the views they hold.
I am not worried about the cost of this. It will probably be a consolidated action. It's not going to take up millions and millions of pounds. I'm not concerned about that. What I am more concerned about is protecting our population and encouraging people to be vaccinated worldwide.
Is that that not the state's responsibility? Is it not the state's responsibility to put out information? In the UK, 0.4% of people have suffered adverse reactions thus far because of the vaccination. Is it not the state's responsibility to communicate that, and not a private citizen like Emily's responsibility to join in that effort?
Shranti, you and I know well that people distrust government. So if you are putting out things that feed in to that distrust of politicians and government, and say in relation to these vaccinations, in fact, this government's lying to you. These vaccinations are poison, or they're injecting you with things that can trace you for life, or whatever it is, then that feeds in to the conspiracy theories that they also hold. They already hold, and that's why it's so dangerous. There's got to be a limit, in my view, to freedom of speech. And if that means protecting people from people who encourage you not to take a vaccine, then that's where the line should be drawn. And we already have lines in our society where we accept that freedom of speech should be curtailed. And I've given you the examples of that. And I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. So it's where the line should be drawn in relation to the biggest health situation that this world has ever seen. Now,
When we get to the other side of this health situation, do you have faith that some of these freedoms will be handed back? Order will be restored, politicians will behave responsibly, the state will contract the role it has begun to play in our lives, and our freedoms will be restored?
well, hang on. I think with it, I may say, Shranti, you're leaping from one issue to another. I mean, at the moment, the freedom of speech that we're seeking to curtail is simply about spreading nonsense about the vaccination and PPE. That's not affecting any wider thing once this pandemic is dealt with at all. It's not going to suddenly give the government the right to say, okay, we want to curtail you criticizing the government. There are things, and this government is trying to do that.
It is, though. I mean, a fellow journalist faces a prison term for an expose on how the health secretary conducted himself during said pandemic. That's an unacceptable breach of the relationship between the press and the public.
Well, look, you won't find any argument with me on that. Of course, I agree they shouldn't be restricted in relation to that. I didn't even know that that was a case that was coming forward, but of course that's unacceptable. The government is trying to restrict senior police officers criticizing the government in relation to their budgets and the like. Well, that's completely unacceptable. They already restrict various sectors of society from speaking out, indeed, against their employment situation. That is unacceptable. But what we're talking about here is views that are encouraging people. I'm not talking about a wider restriction on freedom of speech. I'm talking about a very specific one here. And that very specific one is not encouraging people to do something that is deeply harmful, not only to themselves, but to the wider society in general. And that, in my view, should be shut down. End of story. And it's not.
I'm going to annoy you. I'm going to annoy you slightly more, Michael, by misquoting Voltaire over here and going back, to that which is famously misattributed to him, the quote about I may disagree with what you
Yeah,
say,
but you
but
could
I will
say,
fight to my
I'll fight
death.
for the right. Exactly.
Have we
Well,
not
fine.
decided that?
Yes, but what you're forgetting about Voltaire is, in part, we have thrown out Voltaire, who you've already reckoned is a misquote, but we've thrown him out already because we've recognized that you are not allowed to say things which incite racial hatred. You're not allowed to do that. You are not allowed. It's a criminal offense. This country has now recognized that Holocaust denial is so abhorrent that you commit a criminal offense to do that. So you're not allowed to encourage people to commit suicide. So they've recognized that there are certain limits, and that, you know, that Voltaire, if he ever said such a thing, is wrong about that, and we as a society do not accept it. So it's whether or not society is prepared to accept someone who spreads absolute nonsense about vaccines and PPE. Now, society might be. Personally, I don't want to see it, because I want to see that we have as healthy and a protected population as much as we possibly can. And we are dealing with a very, very wicked pandemic, which is still killing millions of people worldwide. And that's why we should protect ourselves against the people who are out there who are spreading absolute nonsense, because people believe this stuff. And bringing it back to Emily, she was given the option, she was warned, take it down and you can consider it. You can stay here, but she wouldn't. So, you know, she's got nothing really to complain about, you know. So what does she want to do? She's been asked not to do it. Yet she's persisted in spreading dangerous nonsense about the vaccines and PPE, which we know is not right.
Oh,
We know.
there you have. There, I agree with you completely. This is an unprecedented situation we're dealing with. The vaccine is our only way out. We do it for yourselves, do it for everyone else, because we're not safe until, no one is safe until everyone is. So there, I agree with you completely. The way out of this pandemic, certainly for the moment, seems to be the vaccine.
Yes. So Shranti, now you, as a very intelligent individual, and indeed myself as a slightly lesser intelligent individual than yourself, will credit ourselves that we can distinguish the nonsense from fact. Right? So we say, fine, you can have this on the website and we can look at it. It is not going to affect us. However, you can't judge the rest of society by that standard, because there are many people out there who will believe that nonsense.
That is unfortunately true. I mean, the papers last week have been full of examples of people who've been vaccine deniers that now haven't lived to see the end of the pandemic. It's
Exactly. And they're on their deathbed saying, oh,
take the vaccine. Yes.
we wish we'd taken the vaccine. But no, we read this stuff and that encouraged us not to take it. I mean, it's you've got to take, my view is you've got to take a hard line on this and you've got to shut it down. And it's not only government that, because people don't trust governments, so government has got to take a harder line in relation to this. And in fact, the public has a wider responsibility. So, for instance, the trendsetters, the influencers who people do follow, they should be doing more in relation to this. They should be saying, you know, the trendsetters who have millions of followers and the musicians and the sports people should be saying, right, we have the vaccine. It's safe. You should take it.
Well, I
Forget
can assure you, I'm not a trendsetter, and neither do I have millions of followers. But for anybody who is listening, I've taken the vaccine. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be given the vaccine, and I would say, please take it. Take it. Take it for your children. Take it for the people around you. Take it.
well, exactly. So, but that's what we should seeking from our society, which is that that those who have taken the vaccine, and of course I myself am double vaccinated, as is my wife, as is all my children, then spread that word. But part of that also, in my own view, is shutting down those people who are telling lies about the vaccine. And they are telling lies about it. There's no basis in truth about it, of what they're saying. And we know that that convinces some people not to take the vaccine. How many, we'll never know. But we know there are people who have not taken the vaccine, who on their deathbed saying, we wish we had. Well,
If
there
you
isn't a
are
tick box to
debating
say,
within,
did you see that particular website? We don't know that. But I
if you are
suspect.
debating about whether or not you're going to take the vaccine and you're still debating that decision, please, I implore you, go to a government website and check out the data there. Social media is not where you should be getting your information to make that decision. Michael, I really do appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me today.
Absolute pleasure. Well, I echo what you say. But I would add that don't necessarily rely on a government website. Listen to people who have actually taken the vaccine themselves and suffered no side effects of it, have not got COVID again. So it's proven within our society. Listen to those people who you respect within society, whether they are sportsmen or women or musicians or whoever they are who have done the same. That's who hopefully you will make you feel confident about taking this vaccine. And if anyone likes me, they can follow what I have to say or you have to say. But I think a Marcus Rashford is probably more likely to get that message across.
Oh, we've seen with Marcus Rashford. He's done good work already, that man.
Exactly.